live for some reason. Well, hello everyone, and welcome. Fortunately, there's a bit of an issue on Twitter X, and we haven't gone live there for some reason. We're live on YouTube, but we're not live on Twitter X. So I'll just send the link out explaining that there's an issue. Hold on. An issue going live on here. Watch here. There you go. I don't know why that is. Try again. It's possibly because I changed my name on Twitter from Academic Agent on X to simply Academic Agent. Yeah, I don't know what the deal is there. I've just removed it for the time being. Okay, so we are YouTube exclusive, although it will go on Substack afterwards in the archive. Anyway, chaps, first of all, there's quite a new lot of new viewers watching the channel at the moment, and if you're one of those new viewers, all I have to say to you is this:
difficult to know how to start a show. As I said, if you've seen me before, and I hope you have, I don't really like new people coming. We've seen the problems it creates.
Anyway, how are you doing this week, Simon?
Very, very good. Apologies to people last week if I sounded a little bit vague and spaced out. It's because last Monday I actually cracked my rib. I fell off my motorbike, basically coming down my own driveway, and hit the 1950s paving stones very hard on my right side. So I was actually kind of smashed out of my noggin on codeine last week. So I may have rambled a bit, but this week I'm smashed out of my noggin on codeine. But due to the miracle of the human body, you get used to it quick enough so that it sort of barely covers the pain now. But at least it's working. So yeah, I'm not in agony.
Oh, sorry to hear that you've about that.
No problem.
I hope you recover swiftly.
Yes.
Horace, how are you doing this week?
I'm all right, thanks. I had codeine after an operation once, and that stuff is dangerous.
Yes.
I found myself laughing at nothing. It was weird. But yeah, I've been really enjoying the last few weeks of Curtis documentaries that I never knew even existed. And as I understand it, Bitter Lake that we're covering today is widely regarded by Curtis fans as one of the best ones, or one of the classics. So this should be good.
Yes, it's certainly a big hit. It's one of the big hitters, I would say. I mean, in the Curtis pantheon, what would you? I mean, it's the Trap. It's Can't Get You Out of My Head. Bitter Lake.
No. You don't mean no. That's a shit one. You mean Century of the Self? That's
sorry. Century of the Self. The Trap, Bitter Lake, and Hypernormalization. Would you say those are the big four?
Seem to be the ones that people are drawn to. Yeah.
But at the time, the Mayfair set and the Power of Nightmares made a big impact as well.
Huge,
when they were on.
Yeah. It'll be interesting when we come to review things how we rank things.
We should be live on X now. It needed to be. I don't know what's going on with that, but yeah. I mean, I like to think though we've uncovered some gems in our journey today. So have we not?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that early stuff, the 80s stuff, actually did yield a lot of really interesting things, where you can see the kind of emergent elements of his style just peeping through, while he's still trapped within the kind of conventional frame of the BBC. This is a really interesting period. I've got a bit of a sort of a spiel here on where Curtis is at the moment. I don't know if you want me to launch into this now, or if we want to, waste the audience's time in more.
Yeah, no, let's get into it. Let's get into it.
Yeah. It's really interesting at this point. So he makes this in 2015, and in the sort of previous years, he's done The Trap in 2007, and we watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, and between 2007 and 2011, when he does All Watched Over, he launches his blog. He's basically been doing things like the Charlie Brooker short films. He's done theatre collaborations like It Felt Like a Kiss with Punch Drunk, and he's got this blog going on the BBC website, and that's quite interesting. He's also got this point where he's developed a recognizable style. And this comes in very pointedly in 2011 as he's doing the publicity for Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. There's this guy called Ben Woodhams who does this parody that everybody's now seen many times called The Loving Trap. And Ben Woodhams is he's just a guy. He works in Parliament, apparently. He's a kind of digital manager for some of their digital services in the House of Lords. So he's got a bit of an interest in Curtis and video editing. And he did this parody, which it gains a bit of traction because I think it splits the viewership in exactly the way that I think illustrates what Curtis's own themes are at the time. It's kind of quite I think I didn't like it as a parody because I think he sort of didn't kind of get the Curtis tropes quite right. But he was doing it in a way that I think was kind of quite snarky as well. I think it's one of those moments where Curtis was starting to divide people. And I think what he did, he called it How the Medium Swamped the Message. That was the subtitle for it. I mean, Curtis's blog is called The Medium and the Message at this time. And basically Woodhams is essentially, saying that, Curtis is over. Ooh, AA's gone. Well, I'll just keep rambling on. He's essentially saying that Curtis is kind of oversimplifying everything. He's making these kind of logical jumps. And I think what it cuts to is the distinction between looking at history as a sort of sacred textual pursuit and versus propaganda, whose techniques Curtis freely admits he uses when he's doing interviews around this time. And so it unsettles this idea of history that's loaded with a message. Because what people really mean when they're talking about the message in doing televised history, they're talking about what they think of as truth. And that's truth with all of a kind of its dense multifactorial detail. And Curtis isn't pursuing a sort of a completist, if you like, of sort of omnicompetent academic version of truth, where you write massive books with lots and lots of citations, footnotes, lots of threads pulled together. He's kind of more what I would call like a prismatic kind of character. He's like a prism in that he's taking the light and he's refracting different colors from it, and he's saying, let's have a look at this one over here. This color's really interesting. So it's one way of parsing historical events. He's not sending a message as such, although he is playing with the techniques of messaging and propaganda. I mean, it's a bit like when Douglas Adams used to, when he was writing his Hitchhiker's Guide books in the early 80s, and they were very popular, and people would say to him, what's the message of your books? And he said, well, there isn't a message. I've written a book. It's not a message. It's a book. It's a thing in and of itself. And also this ties with people like Oliver Stone. When he makes a film like JFK, talking about the JFK assassination conspiracy, he puts together a lot of variations of what might have happened in the story, because he says he's consciously creating a work of counter myths to begin to challenge the dominant regime myths. And I think this is what Curtis does. He's in this same mode. Not everything that you see on the screen is kind of nailed down in a historically cited or a sense of his, a completely coherent argument. As he says himself, it's images drifting around like waves in a fever, and he's tripping between what is real, what is not, in a sense. And I think he contends that, people are basically exhilarated by the information space at this moment, but they're also very frightened when it doesn't conform to what they know, because the digital information space by that point has become an area where the space is constantly reflecting the self back to you through the algorithm. So if your sense of self is quite unstable and incomplete, and your emotional nature is subject to anxieties tied to that feedback, it becomes a kind of hall of mirrors, which is very disorientating to people, and in itself feels unsafe if they've got a kind of very pinned down notion of, we're going to do history and it absolutely has to be complete. And Curtis gets a number of critiques in the reviews for this show. What I'm sort of interested in, though, is the way in which he takes from his blog this focus from 2009 onwards. He starts to do these blog entries that he titles Kabul City Number One. And he runs this on to about 10 blog entries into about 2010. So this is 5 years before he's made the documentary, but he's increasingly fascinated by Afghanistan. He's doing a kind of series in the blog of places where the European powers have pulled out from, and what's the sort of legacy that's left behind from that. And he begins to notice, for instance, in July 2010, he says on the blog, since 2001, we've been repeatedly told by both politicians and journalists that our troops there in Afghanistan are to prevent further terrorist attacks on the West and to bring modern democracy to a backward country. But that is now changing. William Dalrymple wrote a really good piece in The Guardian last week, arguing that by installing members of the Northern Alliance as the rulers of Afghanistan in December 2001, the Americans and NATO were unwittingly taking sides in a civil war that had been going on since the early 1970s. They installed a Tajik, Uzbek, Hazara regime that has little interest in democracy. And what are called the Taliban insurgents are in reality a rebellion by the Pashtun majority in the country against that elite. And thus they might represent the will of the majority. He also argues that the fighting has become part of the proxy wars fought between India and Pakistan for the last 45 years. And this is the argument of The Economist, he says. It had a fascinating piece last week about how Pakistan's support for the insurgents, like the Haqqani network, is driven by the fear of a growing Indian presence in Afghanistan. And that's one of the things that actually comes out in some of the reviews that critique this particular show, Bitter Lake, is they say, oh, he doesn't pay any attention to Pakistan. Well, he actually does. He does a lot of the background work and the other threads, if you like, in his blog, which builds up sort of quite an interesting archive of stories just around these fragments of Afghan history at this time. But then in July 2010, he as a cameraman called Phil Goodwin, who is a BBC cameraman. He's been out in Afghanistan for 14 years, and he brings back some footage. And Curtis says, we've been fighting a war in Afghanistan for 13 years, and yet we haven't done a history of it on the BBC. But then a cameraman called Phil Goodwin comes to me. He's gone out to Kabul and opened the cupboards at the back of the BBC offices. He got out the tapes of everything we'd shot there over the last 40 years, the rushes, the unedited material. He sat there for weeks with his laptop, digitizing it all, and he came back with 26 terabytes of footage. No one was really interested at the BBC, but he gave them to me about 2 years ago, and I've been going through them. They're wonderful, amazing. And I realized that you can make a film out of the footage, one that actually captured the reality of the experience there. Not of everything, but it gives you a sense of how complex, strange, and knowing the Afghans are. And so he's building this out of these unedited rushes, and he says, some of it's boring, some of it's really interesting, some of it's just very beautiful to look at, and what he's doing is he's trying to sort of give this sense of how it felt to be there. This emotional journalism that he talks about. He's responding to his critics who are saying, but you're simplifying reality. And he says, my response is this: all reality is incredibly complex and chaotic. To make sense of it, we have to tell stories about it, which inevitably simplifies. And that is what politicians and journalists do. What I try to do is to find new facts and data, things you haven't thought about, and turn them into new stories. My aim is to use these stories to try and make the complexity and chaos intelligible. So he's what we're seeing is the tension in the people beginning to criticize Curtis's work, beginning to parody it. And we're seeing the disconnection of image and purely intellectual logic, these kind of, abrupt jumps in the narrative, the contrapuntal music that is seemingly out of keeping with the theme and not literal. And you're getting this sort of disguised anxiety that people have about their own psychological congruence with the world. And this, I think he thinks, is is sort of diagnostic of this move into cyberspace that's happening at this time. I mean, it's sort of no coincidence. A lot of this stuff is happening after Occupy and after the Arab Spring in the early 2010s. This is a time when the blogosphere is sort of losing mass influence, while the new generation fast delivery social media, microblogging like Twitter, really take off. And there's two sorts of feelings he has. Occupy is a kind of massive lost opportunity to remake the world, because ultimately the idealism of a networked collective resistance is one without a directional leadership. And in particular, the Occupy movement, he criticizes because they completely anathematized the idea of power. They would sit down, have these meetings where everybody would be kind of sitting there repeating back the mantras of the collective, and anybody who tried to talk about, well, why don't we do this, would be frowned upon. So Occupy kind of painted itself into a corner. And then there was the Arab Spring, which he saw as expressing a kind of tragic naivety as to the dangers of confronting power, like Occupy, using social media to organize. But when you attempt to confront power, all that individualistic agency and populism has just summoned this deadly response in the Arab world. So basically, as I say, since 2011, he's disappeared for 4 years. He's done a few interviews, but it more or less stops while he's doing the blog. And when he does All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, he forms the idea of a novelistic, emotionally involving style. And he makes experiments with that series, particularly the last episode we saw, where you had the story. It was kind of caught between the sort of the cold and brutal and unfair reality of genetic determinism that William Hamilton, the scientist, outlined, and then there was this tragic figure, George Price, who was kind of reaching for Christian faith to try and prove that man could go beyond genetic determinism and he could be capable of an altruistic response. And of course, he committed suicide because he felt in despair that didn't seem to be possible. So I think with Curtis's critics at this point, there's people who are struggling a bit to accept an impressionistic view of anything, which is what Curtis is offering at this time. And as I say, you see a number of these reviews. I mean, there's people. There's a guy in the Daily Telegraph, Jasper Rees. He reviews Bitter Lake, and essentially he's saying, Curtis is using manipulation techniques and oversimplification, but that's kind of the point. That's what Curtis is insisting we kind of have to give ourselves up to, if you like, if we are to tell a story, if we are to have a narrative coming down from somewhere. I don't think he's necessarily talking about a return to a kind of patrician style of the BBC, but this is where he feels the elite ability to create narrative is important, and he uses propaganda techniques to do it. But he is, as he constantly says, saying to you, have you thought about it this way? And then you've got this guy, Jonathan Boone, in The Spectator. And again, he's trying to, take it apart on the basis that Curtis doesn't mention this, he doesn't mention that. You actually find that between the blog and the film, he does mention things. So you have this sort of reflexive tendency to try and break Curtis down and see the flaws in it. But what he's doing is not, if you like, the formal linearity and information hierarchy of conventional TV history. This is a kind of an experiential thing. This is why Bitter Lake has this sort of dreamlike quality. The other things that you see are that there's people in The Guardian, a lady called Emma Graham Harrison. She's lived out in Afghanistan. And again, she does a little bit of this thing of saying, well, he kind of gets this wrong. She's lived out there a number of years, being a correspondent. But what Curtis is doing is he's trying to sort of emphasize the big story about our intervention in Afghanistan. He's doing what is the West's kind of top line justification for things in geopolitical terms. And his main argument is that as the West itself is basing its approach on enforcing a simplified reality when it goes into countries, that's kind of he's in his own sense making that point in the style of his production. He has to simplify the narrative down for that reason. So So there's always this element of being criticized for the methods he used, which he's trying to create a kind of artistic congruence with the theme he's describing. And interestingly, the more sort of insightful critiques at this time don't come from the mainstream press. They actually come from bloggers. And it's funny because he thinks bloggers are basically bullies. He doesn't kind of like them. They're sort of, sort of pressure, single interest pressure groups. But there's a very interesting blog by an Austrian guy called Jonah Wedekind. And he talks about Bitter Lake and this method of this using this simplification to illustrate the simplification that gets us into trouble in Afghanistan. And he says, it is a dialectical art for one to criticize mainstream simplifications of complex realities and chaotic crises, and to then proceed with telling a simple story that offers an alternative explanation of complexity or another way of looking at chaos. In his new film, Bitter Lake, the BBC's documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis shows that he is a master of this dialectical art. So there's this interesting stuff that comes out of that. So he's using, in a way, some blogs talk about him using, the very same sort of agitprop techniques. But the contradiction doesn't bother Curtis. He says, well, I'm still saying what I think. I'm using all the tricks and propaganda to get it over with. So from here, we begin to look at the sort of influences in Curtis's methodology of filmmaking at this time. He's very much, I talked a lot before in previous episodes when we did the Mayfair set, I think, or Century of the Self, I can't remember. But he's looking at a lot of cultural theory here, and it's my old friend Mark Fisher coming in again. But one of the themes you'll see watching the film, and this is a theme that's repeated. I think what is happening is this is the time when he's probably talking to Fisher. They used to meet up at a cafe at Liverpool Street Station and have these long chats. And I think he's very influenced by Fisher's themes from when he did a book called Ghosts of My Life, Writings on Depression, Hauntology and Lost Futures in 2014. And you see this reflected in Curtis's blog. He has all these kind of sub-stories and sub-themes. I'll just go through a few of the titles of some of the subjects he covers. The Ghosts in the Living Room, which was one of Curtis's pieces about supernatural phenomena captured on television. The Ghost of the Colonels, which was about the Colonels' coup in Greece in 1967. He did a piece on the blog called He's Behind You, about Gaddafi. There was a piece about Mrs. Thatcher called The Ghost in the House of Wonks, how Mrs. Thatcher constructed a fake ghostly version of Britain's past and then used it to maintain her power. And a piece called Paradiabolical, The Ghosts of What Happened in Algeria and Somalia 20 years ago. These ideas about ghosts, about haunting, these are Mark Fisher's cultural reflections on the way you've ended up with this kind of recursive cultural sterility, because the West is in this historical crisis of shifting from the real into cyber time. And there's a sort of dawning inability to come to terms with the new psychological pressures of a world that through the digital frontier is being ordered by feedback, the need for conscious self-design of the online persona, the sense of idealism of the past betrayed, the West being at the end of history. The US is, we are faced with becoming, the last men of Nietzsche and Fukuyama kind of fame. And the West is trying and failing to remake itself. So it goes to this exotic empty land of Afghanistan, which Curtis has become obsessed with, which seems arid but placid in this kind of slightly mystic way. And he sees the West as kind of thinking it's in need of filling this empty land with a kind of moral vision. But the problem for Curtis is he's looking at the West and seeing it as a kind of deadening force of this neoliberal replication and the imposition of its own spiritual emptiness on the big Afghan spaces, which are already kind of emptied out by successive attempts to remake that country, and which, as we see historically, they simply swallow up all of the previous attempts, the flailing attempts to kind of impose modernity in a place where the ancient forces are actually like ghosts haunting us now. Yeah. This thing of going to Afghanistan, the way Curtis presents it in Bitter Lake, it's like a sort of John Carpenter film where, one of these sort of plots that you'd get where like modern archaeologists or investigators are kind of overtaken by some sort of atavistic supernature that they thought they were too sophisticated to be overcome by. And that's a kind of model in a way for where he's coming from. So visually, you get these themes coming through of ghosts, and you see this in the footage. He chooses a lot of this footage where you see sand kind of shifting across the desert, or you see the sand, in coming from explosions, a bit like the images of the genie that he uses in the Thief of Baghdad footage in The Power of Nightmares. You see these kind of drifting specters of dust, the wind on the desert, clouds from explosions, sandstorms. He uses footage from the Dust Bowl in America in the 30s. He uses John Carpenter's music from The Fog. And he has like these sort of ghostly mirage figures in the desert. There's quite a good shot of just a single man walking through a deserted town, helicopters, these kind of distorted kind of ghosts in the sky. And musically, he complements this more as well with he, instead of previously when he uses music as sort of plot stings, like he does in the previous series, kind of like shorthand for the historical twists of events. Sometimes it's whimsical, bit of Morricone, and sometimes it's suspenseful, bit of John Carpenter, and sometimes it's romantic, bit of Shostakovich, and it's all kind of chopped up. And in Bitter Lake, he does this thing now of taking this archive that he's come across and playing it long, and so the music is kind of longer and more blended and seamless and layered, and it's almost sort of continuously shifting in this dreamlike, disorientating way. And that's very much where he brings in things like Burial, famously, who's got this kind of this music which it's kind of like sort of very spacious. There's sort of lots of industrial kind of sound in there. It's in a sense about this world of the past that the West has lost, this world of kind of production and control that's echoing as it fades away. And a lot of the music soundtrack is like that. They're very kind of spectral landscapes. And as I say, especially Burial, this is his kind of big phase now. It's not so much Brian Eno anymore. He thinks that Burial is the genius of our age. And again, going back to Mark Fisher, he talked about that music from Burial. He talks about it as a libidinization of anxiety itself, a kind of sonic fictional intensification and extrapolation of the neoliberal world's destruction of solidarity and security. So I've thrown in quite a lot there, but there are sort of very interesting influences that we'll pick out as we go along. Where if you look, you'll see these kind of connections in the types of footage he chooses. A lot of kind of eeriness in there that he's trying to get into this emotional connection with this sort of deadening hand of what we're doing in this place, which is kind of just baffled as to why we're there. And he's beginning to essentially, it's part of his refutation of the problem of individualism, because he sees that as a dead end, and it sort of, because it breaks down the possibility of joining with others to change the world in the way that they were trying in the West to change Afghanistan. And he's going for something much more emotionally connective. So it can be difficult to stop this video, this particular film too much, because a lot of it is kind of dreamlike, and you have these long sequences. You just kind of have to experience them, and then there'll be things to talk about. But there's a lot of it we maybe just need to just let run long. So,
go on, Horace.
Are there two versions of this? Do you know which one we're watching? I think there's two different cuts of Bitter Lake, like the one that was on TV and then a longer one or something.
There's the one that we're going off is one that's on YouTube. It's 137 minutes long, the full thing. There's a couple of cuts to this one because there were some clips that he used from a couple of clips from the Carry On film, Carry On Up the Khyber, which I think have been cut out for copyright. So this video can stay on YouTube, because I think that's the only thing that may have changed there. I don't know about any other cuts of this as such. Interestingly, though, somebody said last night when I was posting up about this, there's interesting resonances between this film and An Ocean Apart, going back to the very beginning of our sort of Curtis arc.
Yeah, there is.
That stuff may well come out very, very, very sort of resonantly. I don't know about any other cuts. I think this is it, but I mean, we'll just sort of see.
A couple of interesting things that occurred to me while you were talking. Simon.
Yeah.
One is quite unlikely, but your description of Curtis's process and thinking in making this vis-a-vis linear history reminded me quite a bit of Thomas Carlyle's process of writing his famous French Revolution. I don't know if you. I mean, it's a big. I mean, my version of it is 3 volumes. You know.
Yeah.
If you ever actually read the French Revolution, it's extremely immediate, right? And what Carlyle was trying to do in that book, he was railing against what he called dry as dust historians. Okay, he called it Professor Dry as Dust. So what Carlyle did is he got magazines, cut-ups, contemporary accounts, and he tried to recreate what it would have been like to be there during the French Revolution, experiencing the Reign of Terror, actually like up close, so you could smell the breath of the people, if that makes any sense.
That's hugely Curtisian. I mean, because as we went back and we talked about his influences, in particular this America trilogy by John Dos Passos, this author in the early 20th century, who does exactly that. Takes you to the kind of the news cuttings, the kind of what's it like on the street, you know, this what he calls the camera eye view, kind of moving through the world. And I think that's a really exciting way to view it.
So it's also go on.
That's also been called the epistolary novel style, hasn't it? In Dos Passos' case, epistolary novels been although it goes broader than letters, but pieced together from whatever kind of.
It's multimedia in a way. Before multimedia. I mean,
and I mean, sorry to go on about Carlyle, but he employs those I mean, these days you'd call them postmodern, but he was doing it in the 19th century.
I find it really interesting.
He has a novel called Sartor Restorus, I think it's called, which is ostensibly a novel about a guy who owns a fabric shop or like a clothes store. And it's done in this really odd way where it's a first-person account, but you're picking up like bits of his letters and it's fragmentary. And the other time he really uses a technique like that is in his famous essay, which I cannot repeat the name of, The Occasional Discourse on the N Question, let's just call it that, right? Where the entire essay, which is a lament against John Stuart Mill's kind of liberalism, right, and anti-racism, Carlyle on the other side of that question, kind of like against the liberals of that day, right? And that whole essay, it is done from the point of view of somebody watching a liberal speech, and then he kind of he is giving a speech, and then he dramatizes the liberal audience murmuring and having comments, and so it's done in this really unusual way. So you're kind of like there in the lecture hall, feeling the discomfort of the audience, you know.
Yes, he talks about this, Curtis does, because he likes that feeling of kind of like the epic Russian novels, you know, where you're seeing a battle from the point of view of dozens of different people, all of these strands coming together.
The other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is that now I can imagine some of the pushback against Curtis, this was coming from the same sort of people who are not unhappy with people like Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson today, right? Just before we came on air, I was watching a couple of Dave Smith appearances. I was thinking, well, maybe I'll do a video on this because he's starting to be quite interesting, this Dave Smith character. I can't remember where he was talking to some woman, and he was saying, like, look, they always say, you just don't understand. You take it too simplistic. It's complicated, right? You need, and he said, look, you don't need to know the 2,000-year history to understand that you don't like kids being blown up, right?
Yes.
Okay. So he cut to the chase, and I feel like with Bitter Lake, I mean, Curtis is basically having a go at the permanent foreign policy establishment, isn't he? Yeah. And they always say that, oh, it's really complicated. You just don't understand. You're not sophisticated enough, etc. You're simplifying, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. They always use those lines. So I actually wonder if some of the criticisms are coming from those types You know,
I think so too. Yes, and I think a lot of it gets framed because people then they take things like from Roger Scruton. They say, well, this is part of the culture of repudiation. You know, the self-hating West that that has to kind of deconstruct itself and its motives. And I don't think it's saying that at all, because I'm certainly not saying knowing facts and and history is a bad thing. That's a particular prism, that's a particular frame of thinking about human events, and this is a different thing that Curtis is doing. I mean, this is what he's doing. He's doing it this moment where like say social media is getting a lot of traction, and the idea of truth is getting destabilized online. I mean, forgetting all of that kind of Donald Trump post-truth stuff, he is talking about where everything is more contested, and you don't have this kind of overall control of narrative. I mean, this is what Douglas Murray is really complaining about: is we the nice people don't have overall control of the narrative anymore, and this is because some people are better at what I call the rhetorical skill of digital engagement. They get followings, and they get followings that are bigger than those other people, and by implication, the nature of digital engagement makes it look like the bigger the following, the better you are, the more right you are. And this is Jonathan Haidt was actually on Novara this week. He was talking about this element of our digital culture that yes, people orientate on the basis of prestige, not necessarily information, and that's true to an extent. We are looking at, well, who are the people who are sort of saying the thing which hits the most numbers, and we give a kind of an interest to that. And I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm saying that, well, sometimes that's because those people may be hitting on something that resonates in exactly the way you said, that just cuts through morally, and therefore then you might want to reverse engineer and go back and look at your history again. But that's the idea of the information prestige economy that we're in.
Now, one thing I want to keep an eye on for us now as we watch this, and this is one of the ones I've seen before, is one of the themes that comes through. I've got all these books by Pasha Glub Pasha, Major General Richard Hilton. My greatest hits collection of old British kind of Colonel Blimps, I guess you call them. I actually love those guys. I've talked about many times. And the books they wrote in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. That one, John Biggs Davison is another one. The Uncertain Ally. One of the big themes in a lot of those books is actually the Middle East. In fact, Major General Richard Hilton has a book called The 13th Power, which is called, the subtitle is The Middle East and the World Situation. One of the enduring themes in all of these books is basically first of all, the British Empire didn't actually formally have the Middle East as part of the empire, right? If that makes sense. It was never like India was under direct control, or, during the scramble for Africa, where they actually ended up taking over swathes of Africa and running it as a colony. Okay. The Middle East was never like that. And the British presence in the Middle East itself was kind of like a default after World War One and then World War Two, where basically, because it was the British Empire, because it was the biggest power in the world, it was like, right, it's up to the British just to run these places for a while, or to take on various mandates, like the Palestine Mandate, for example, or, there was informal British interests like the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, right? So Britain never had a formal empire in Iran, as an example, right? Or in any of the Arab countries. It didn't run them, but it had interests there. It had contracts. It had meddlings in the various governments and kings going back in the 20th century. One of the things that happens after World War II, and especially after Suez, is basically a changing of the guards, right? Where the British running of these operations, or the British interest there, as represented by a man like Glub Pasha, was basically replaced with the US, with the Americans. Okay.
Mhm.
And the Americans and the British did things differently in the Middle East. And in some cases, they were different people too. I mean, not just Brits versus Americans, but some of the American interests there, uh, let's say, may have had deeper connections to the Middle East than some of the British people who were there. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
You mean Qataris, ethnic Qataris? Right?
Well, exactly. That Qatari money. But this is one of the things that the way in which the West engages with the Middle East is actually different from the first half of the 20th century to the second half, and the difference actually comes from the change of who's running the show, right?
Yes.
The Brits versus the Americans, brackets, certain people who are in charge of the American government.
You
so
see,
something I want to keep an eye on, you know.
Yeah, you see this in the kind of the sort of counter-revolutionary moment in the late 70s that we'll get into with this, where I can't remember the guy's name, Armin and Taraki, the two Afghan leaders, and there's one guy who kind of goes pro-America, and the one who goes anti-America. They have this struggle within the Afghan government, and guess which one loses? it's the one who's well, they both lose in the end, but certainly the one who's the anti-America guy gets topped, and then you sort of begin to see how that new power relationship unfolds, and just tying in with what you're saying there about this changeover. This is something that Curtis expresses about this specifically with this film and with this era. He says, I just think we're at the end of something, says Curtis, discussing the plight of Western leaders who are increasingly telling us moral fables about good and evil, darkness and light, global capital and personal responsibility that we no longer believe. I have a lurking theory that we are where the Soviet Union got to in about 1988. Its great big stories about the world weren't working any longer and it collapsed. And I think the same is true of us. I think we're at the fag end of a great big story that came out of the Second World War, to be honest. And the interviewer asks him what he thinks about that, whether it's terrifying or exciting. And he says, well, it's frightening, but it's also terribly exciting, isn't it?
So I think there's a lot of truth to both of the things you said there. That I do have the impression that the American empire has probably peaked already. Certainly will peak soon, if not. But the other bit as well, there's, I mean, he wrote that more than 10 years ago, right? But about the comment about the end of the Second World War. But I'm seeing people all over the place from left to right saying now that hold. I mean, from all quarters as well. From I've seen it from a Catholic this morning on the Winston Marshall show, saying that this we're bound by comparing everything to the Second World War, and it's stupid. It's destroying what's good. Like Winston Marshall's a Zionist, by the way. So this is everywhere.
Yeah. And just to qualify what I was saying just now, by the way, about Britain not really having a formal empire in the Middle East. A lot of it goes to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after World War One. You have a look at this map here. I mean, the Ottoman Empire was here, basically, and it was really carved up just before and during and then after World War One. But the British presence in all of those places was kind of straight. It was like, oh, it's a protectorate for a while, or it wasn't like, oh, now you're part of the British Empire type thing. It was more like, okay, well, the Ottomans lost this war. We're going to figure out what to do with you, in this period. So there's that weird period between, let's say, 1914 and the end of World War II, where you've got Britain basically like in charge of the administration of all of those former Ottoman territories. And that's how you end up getting with weird things like Pasha Glub in Transjordan, in charge of like training their army. And then at a certain point, a lot of the kings and a lot of the leaders were like, right, thanks, Britain, but it's time for you guys to go now. Brackets. Yeah, the Americans are here. They've just given a shitload of money. Bugger off. So, and that is really, I mean, I've talked about this before, but that's the real story about the Mossadegh coup in Iran, right? The real story of that was breaking up the monopoly of the Anglo-Persian oil company BP, as it later became, and opening up Iran under the last Shah to the various oil interests of all of the West under the leadership of the Americans. Obviously, that went wrong given the revolution, etc. But basically, similar things were happening in every single Middle Eastern country where you get this changeover. Suez is the big symbolic one in Egypt, right? But it happens basically everywhere. And then, to complicate matters, the Soviets are also vying for influence. Okay, they've been under the British, but now they could become commie type thing, which we're about to see in this Bitter Lake, as just a little bit of kind of necessary historical context, I think.
Yeah.
All right, shall we get going?
Okay.
That was a longer preamble, but I've got a feeling we're going to be a few episodes on this, aren't we? Let's be honest. So,
yeah.
Let's see if we can go an hour or so, half hour, see how far we get.
Increasingly, we live in a world where nothing makes any sense. Events come and go like waves of a fever, leaving us confused and uncertain. Those in power tell stories to help us make sense of the complexity of reality. But those stories are increasingly unconvincing and hollow.
Excuse me, I'm live.
Pause, please. Sorry,
Going well.
I just want to recognise. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but that is mint condition nugget of Curtisism there. That's like, we tell ourselves these. That's just bringing them all the Curtis intros together. That's just like the intro of hypernormalization as well. We tell ourselves this. We believe that.
I should have mentioned The Living Dead. I would put up as top. I know it was early. But
it's a good one. Yeah, that's really.
That's
good,
like Hunky Dory or something. Always making an analogy. It was an early 5-star classic. Anyway,
Night at the Opera.
This is a film about why those stories have stopped making sense, and how that led us in the West to become a dangerous and destructive force in the world. It is told through the prism of a country at the center of the world, Afghanistan.
Who are you?
What the hell is that? Is that like the Queen's coronation? Is that what's going on there?
Don't know. I think it's almost like one of those big dance-a-thons they used to do. Sort of in the Great Depression in America, where people would like dance for 24 hours. But it's obviously not, like you say, it's some sort of big event. But I don't know where it comes from.
Can I just say, to Horace's point, we are almost at like peak self-parody Curtis here. I mean, it's got everything. What's the music? Is this Portishead or something? What's the music?
This is Burial. This is Burial Come Down to Us, which Curtis thinks is absolutely amazing stuff, and it's got a great atmospheric to it. It's very expansive, very spacious. So it kind of goes with these kind of visuals of this big place.
And like really nostalgic sounding and like sort of regretful about the passing of time or something, right?
Exactly. Mournful, echo, crackle on the sound, all of the sort of elements of decay that you have in this cultural moment where you're reflecting on the past.
So, sorry to pause it again, but it's just reminded me. Did I tell you that at the gym the other day? I think I made a tweet about this, but nobody believed it happened. There was this really big, muscled up guy probably in his early 20s. He had the broccoli Zoomer haircut, right?
Mm.
And there was this old guy getting changed, and he was Russian, right? He was like, "Oh, where you from, bruv? Where you from, bruv?" You know. So this was like a white Zoomer muscle, but he talks like he had that accent, bruv, you know, bruv. And he was like, and this guy was like, I grew up in the Soviet Union, right? And then he was like, oh yeah, we love the Russians, bruv, because they ain't pussies, And then he was like, yeah, but you know, I grew up in the Ukraine province. And the trouble is, people, they start killing each other. And he's like, yeah, that's life though, yo, bruv. First you get the money, then you get the power, and then people want to take it from you.
God.
You know? Yeah, we love it. But the main thing, the most important thing is Russians ain't pussies. this old guy who must have been like probably approaching 70 or something. He was just completely bemused. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, where the fuck am I? How the fuck is this?
It's like this sort of the Scarface mentality meets like centuries of Slavic misery, you know.
It was
and
just
pain.
It was just bizarre. And this Russian guy, fair play to him. He was just I don't know. He maintained that kind of Russian dourness in the face of this Zoomer. So it was kind of. I was like, this is Andrew Tate's audience, isn't it? That's who. He watches Andrew Tate, that young lad. I guarantee it. But anyway, let's carry on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just sorry to keep on pausing it, but watching some of these scenes, Curtis going through the discards, the bits that didn't make it into the final cut, right? It must open his eyes to the actual reality of something, right? Because it draws your attention to the constructedness of the reality that we see, right? 100%. Nobody would think about like Riyadh in the 50s with that film crew and those. Do you know what I mean? Like he's exactly. It must occur to him that so much of life is fake when he's going through those hours and hours of reels. You know.
Well, in a way, it sort of resonates a bit with this stuff that was going on in the last week. You know, Drukpa Kunli, the whole UK mythos, and the way. Sorry, Semyagov, for using the word mythos, by the way. But that Radio 4 piece where they talked about the UK genre and was saying, well, it's criticism, but it's not actually making any overt criticism. You know, they're posting these images and these ideas without any kind of framing. You know, which is of course what they would do when they would take images and ideas. And you know, people are just uploading these images of the degradedness of the UK and people. You know, they know what you're saying. You know, you don't, and as you say, Curtis is doing a similar thing in a way, like you're saying, he's taking the discards, the B-roll, and seeing something interesting in it because it hasn't been consciously framed. This is stuff that generally just didn't make it into broadcast at all. It was just witnessing what was going on, and it says more than if you know, as you say, you construct it into a sort of BBC approved narrative.
Pause for a second. Is that the moment when John Simpson was with a convoy and it struck by American aircraft?
That's right.
Or British, I think it was American, wasn't it? But
it was 2003 in Iraq. Yeah, they were on the ground with some soldiers, and there were some American special forces there, and they I think F-15s or whatever just bombed them, and it killed a number of the soldiers, and it killed the BBC translator who was with them, just blew his legs off. And that blood
smear of blood on the camera. Yeah.
That was a guy called Fred Scott, who was the cameraman who his face he got some shrapnel in his forehead or something. His face was bleeding all over the camera. I mean, he was alive. He was fine. But yeah, it was quite a brutal. I remember that happening. Actually, it was very brutal moment there.
Reminds me of Chris Morrison. War is confusing. War is confusing. It was apparently this is explained. There was a lot of this in that Second Gulf War, right? And apparently it's just standard for American pilots, and it was specifically American pilots, not British ones, to be on speed, basically amphetamines or like ephedrine or stuff that is confusing. It confuses you. Like people get confused about what's going on when they're on amphetamines.
Friendly fire was an absolute meme.
Yeah, loads of people were killed by that.
Yeah, it was in the Kosovo War as well. Didn't they like accidentally blow up a bridge or something ridiculous? The Americans. Anyway, let's carry on. Just wait for a minute. That's okay. So no pausing for 1 minute.
In 1946, American engineers, along with their wives and families, began to arrive at a dusty airstrip in Helmand in southern Afghanistan. They worked for the biggest construction company in the world, called Morrison Knudsen. And the King of Afghanistan had brought them there to build a giant planned new world. A complex of dams, canals, roads, and even a new model city. The King's aim was to harness the power of the giant Helmand River and turn his country into a modern society, just like in the West.
This is another callback to that Gold Coast thing that we did. Horace, he loves this theme, doesn't he?
Yeah. Dams. He loves dams. Yeah.
The dam project.
The
Is this burial,
Kingdom of
Simon?
Afghanistan is located
think
roughly
so.
10,000 miles from either coastline of the United States, almost directly on the opposite side of the globe, westward from China, beyond the Himalayas.
The Himalayas? the Himalayas, yeah? The Himalayas. I will say, though, that even this bit of footage here, I was complaining the other day on Twitter about how the horrible modern world has robbed us of what the leftists call Orientalism, Simon, right? But there was still quite a lot of Orientalism in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
I really miss it. I kind of like the idea of,
Yeah.
Last week we were talking about the different lands in Disneyland, and there's like Arab land and like China land and so on. Like once upon a time, actual countries were like that. It was like, oh, here's this Arab themed place called the Middle East.
Well, you see it a bit later on in this documentary with the old sort of hippie students going off in the 70s and buying their lovely Afghan coats and all that sort of thing. And you actually, when you watch that sequence, you do take quite a benign view of those kind of hippie adventurers in a way. And you think, well, again, at least they were doing less harm. It's that thing that Curtis poses about radical change. Do you really want revolution, or do you just want the banks to be a bit nicer to you? Is there a way of interacting with these countries, which means we don't bomb them to buggery?
Yeah, or transform them so that they're just like the same as Milton Keynes.
Yes.
This curious map here, right? So we've got Pakistan, which existed from 46, I think, or 47. and you've got India there, and you've got Afghanistan. They are all sovereign countries. And then you've got Turkestan. I assume that's supposed to be part of the map of the Soviet Union. But even then, Turkestan had not existed for a long time. That was already the Soviet republics of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and so on. So, but it still says Turkestan. You've got Xinjiang. I assume that's the same as Xinjiang province, where it's like the Muslim part of China, right? And you got Tibet there. I assume that is. Do you know what I mean? Though, like they've sort of denied Uzbekistan. It's Soviet.
I like all the old names though. I mean, I still call it Yugoslavia, and I still call it Czechoslovakia. So
Sure.
I prefer it.
Why not?
If my dad was here, of course, he would remind everybody that word "stan" means land in Persian, and it just denotes the old satrapies of the Persian Empire, and by rights, all of those lands should belong to Persia. Belong to Iran, as he would tell you. So,
as we're about to talk a lot about like Pakistan and Afghanistan here, does the word Pashtun have anything to do with Persia, or is that am I just drawing?
Pashtun, it may well. I'd have to double check that.
We will come up on a bit of ethnic demographic interest with some of the footage actually, which does have connections to Iran.
So I know that, like, obviously Iran is a country that has somewhat exported its culture and language, right? There's like Farsi is a language spoken not only in Iran, right? Like I think Freddie Mercury was raised.
I don't want to simplify things too much, Horace, right? But basically, in that part of the world, any little bit that is civilized as a result of Persia.
Cool.
Any good bits in any of those places, including like spices, writing, poetry, food, court culture, clothes, they basically all come from
law, code of laws.
I mean, I wish I was making that up, but it's kind of like the analogy I would make. You know, like in Europe, in Renaissance Europe, Italy was kind of the high point of the European culture, and so Britain and France and all the other countries, they would inherit Italian court ways and poetic forms and fashions and so on. And I mean, Persia's been basically like that in that part of the world pretty much forever, like pretty much going back to before Christ, so
I would just like Freddie Mercury was of like Indian Iranian or Iranian Indian background, wasn't he? He was like his family spoke Farsi. I think he had a Zoroastrian funeral.
Farsi or something.
Yeah, right? Farsi, Parsi. I think that's the same. Yeah, yeah. It's an Iranian origin sub ethnic group in India, with some relation to Zanzibar as well. I don't know why, but yeah, he had a maybe that's wrong actually, but he had a Zoroastrian funeral. Freddie Mercury. Farouk Bulsara, his real name.
No, don't quote me on this, but I believe Zoroastrianism is a very strange religion that you have to be born into. You can't like convert to it. You're either born into it or not. So you can't become a Zoroastrian.
I've been learning my Zoroastrian rites ready for conversion, but alas, I'll give that up.
There we go. People are now wondering. Someone says AA is clearly a descendant of steppe people, maybe a Scythian or something. I've explained before. From my dad's family comes from a tribe called the Bakhtiaris, who were a nomadic people who belonged to an ethnic group called the Lurs, Lurs, who actually predate the Persians. That they were there even in the Elamite period. So yeah, they're kind of an old group that have been there all through Iran's history. But so anyway, let's carry on.
It is a landlocked country, bordered on the north by the Soviet Union, and on the east by Pakistan, and on the west by Iran.
The king was called Zahir Shah, and he often came to visit the project. Afghanistan was a deeply conservative country, and he was determined to modernize it. What the king was trying to create in Helmand was a copy of what President Roosevelt had done in America in the 1930s. And the company he had hired, Morris & Knudsen, had worked back then for Roosevelt, building a new world of dams and power stations across America. Now they were going to do the same for Afghanistan.
There's a guy in the chat called the Persian who says, ever since the Persian interregnum in the Abbasid era, Persian culture has been the highest culture of the Islamic Empire. Even the Ottomans spoke Persian. Yes, but I would even predate Persian cultural predominance really back to Cyrus and co. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever played Civilization, but you know, in Sid Meier's Civilization, how you can get cities that culture flip. You know, like where they just decide to join because your civilization's better or whatever. If you read the history of Cyrus, you're like, oh wow, culture flip, culture flip, culture flip, culture flip. You know, I don't know how many places he actually like conquered by force. He did a lot of like, oh, and then Cyrus talked to the opposition leader and they changed sides, and then it was Persian type thing. So yeah, he's kind of an interesting leader like that. But anyway, let's carry on.
The engineers and their families lived in a complex of houses around the king's country palace in Helmand. It became known as Little America.
So sorry to carry on giving basic history to people. Yes, Cyrus is in the Bible, and yes, he's the same one that ended the Babylonian captivity and gave them the temple, etc., etc. That's why there was a special coin. Do you remember when they made that special coin for Trump? They also made a special coin for Cyrus in Israel. So
I don't know if anyone's ever read any Anne Rice books. She did a book called Servant of the Bones, which was set in that time, like Babylon, but conquered by Cyrus. And the characters are Jews, and what it meant for, and it carries on into the modern day as well. It was a really imaginative story based on that conquest.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting thing in the Bible where, you know, they talk about the mandate of heaven, right? There's this dynamic in the Bible where God acts through successive leaders, right? So before Cyrus is Nebuchadnezzar, right? Who basically, like, when they talk about like God punishing these people for doing, you know, for not following his ways or whatever, you know, he comes in the form of Nebuchadnezzar, but then like they went too far. So he now comes in the form of like he acts through Cyrus. And then there's another, and this is kind of an interesting aspect of understanding providential history as depicted in the Bible, which is one of the, when we're talking about Carlyle, if you want to really understand like that great man theory of history, there's an aspect to which there's a divine element to it where, you know, you get you can make arguments that certain things happen because God has willed it type thing, you know, and certainly that is one way of reading the Old Testament at the very least, and even in some you know, even in Judaism they'll speak in that way, if I understand it correctly.
Definitely, I've seen that. Yeah.
You got everything in it? And quite a lot of stuff lying around. There is a dead insurgent lying here. A man in his early 20s. Better?
نمیاره از خودت جنگک میکنی تو باید
Not exactly Peter Capaldi, is it?
It's from a show called The Ministry. I posted a clip of it that I found. It's actually quite funny. It is quite like a sort of Afghan thick of it, as they say. It's quite impressive, really, for given the paucity of resources they must have had to produce it, though.
But including firearms in the story. That's
I think that's just a crappy airsoft gun, I have to say. but the actual acting in the clips is actually, I mean, it's not quite as developed and sophisticated in some of the obviously the storyline stuff, but they grasp completely, the actors, the nature of these kind of self-important characters and the unintentional comedy around them as well.
Sounds curiously similar to Farsi, what they're speaking, by the way.
Oh.
Kind of, can't really tell what they're saying, but it sounds like the sound is close to Farsi.
Okay, I'll follow you in. Off you go. Yeah. Okay. How are you? Thank you. Very good. How are your families? Yes, come.
What will it take to stop the fighting?
جنگ موقع پاقا وقت که دوی سره خلاصولشون که د امریکا ځواکونه دی باید د افغانستان څخه ووځي.
It's weird that it really sounds like they're speaking Farsi, but they're not. It sounds identical, but I can't understand them. So it must be some variant, like there's different dialects of Welsh. Like they speak different Welsh up north. I think it's something like that because it's definitely part of the same family.
Welsh has got commonality with Scottish, but it's not actually mutually intelligible. But they come from the same Brythonic group, don't they? So it might be that, like a language group thing.
The guy, the Persian in the chat, is saying it is Dari, a version of Farsi. So there we go. Right, that explains it then.
How long have you been with the Taliban, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, with all those barbers, you'd think they'd have better haircuts, wouldn't you? I'd have thought they were swimming with barbers out there. It's a drug test, Simon.
No, it's just that they're doing retinal scanning to try and track insurgents. It's It's quite interesting. Might as well just pause it for a second. It's just quite an interesting moment there, sort of cultural dissonance that, you know, the West is coming in, and one of the first things it insists on is absorbing people up into the kind of data matrix, and you sort of see the looks on these guys' faces about what on earth is going on, you know.
I think Edward Said talked about stuff like that in Orientalism. Didn't mention data collection exactly, but the way that the West tries to penetrate the Orient, it obviously with a sexual connotation, but it also means to get inside and understand it and inspect it with undignified intensity. You know,
at least in our context, it's this absorption into sort of our systems of information as an extension of our techniques of managerial governance.
Maybe Blair was just test running what he wanted to do on the native population.
That's his style, isn't he? He always does, doesn't he? He always goes to Albania to work things out.
To test run it on the places we're invading and run it back home.
Yeah.
Chris, what's going on? All right, wow. Let's go. Wow, you look creepy up close.
Looks pretty creepy far away too.
Yeah, that's true. Well, what's going on? How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good right now. It's been a pretty exciting day.
Yeah, getting kills out here.
We did get some cases.
Today, just for documentation, today was the day we went against order, and we shot anyway. And we killed like a whole bunch of people.
24 unapproved rounds.
24 unapproved high explosive mortar rounds. That's about 40,000 pounds of death right there.
Yup. Yup. Fuck it. Looks like a raven here almost.
Yeah, all I gotta say, actually, you know what? I do have something to say.
Let's hear it.
I love the fucking Marine Corps. I know many of you.
We got you on camera saying it.
I know many of you don't, but what we did today.
Hey, we need born killers like you.
We're all born killers.
Pause. Why are they boasting about it on film? I don't understand.
Maybe they never expected it to make it into an Adam Curtis documentary. Yeah.
It's difficult to know what to add to that, really.
Did anything happen to them? I presume not.
No.
Yeah, you know, you get court-martialed if that's or not. I don't know. you expect to get court-martialed for that, right?
I mean, I suppose it's the stuff we saw coming out from WikiLeaks. With the the attacker, the Apache helicopter attacking the journalists in Iraq. The extent of the furore over that. It's just kind of a verite, record of the same sorts of things of people chuckling away about wasting civilians. I'm not casting a judgment. I'm just saying that's what it sounds like.
At the end of the Second World War, President Roosevelt travelled to the Great Bitter Lake in the middle of the Suez Canal. At the same time, he sent another American warship to pick up the King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz. The meeting of King and President was to have powerful and disastrous consequences both for the West and, in a strange way, for Afghanistan.
Now, what's really confusing about this King Aziz is that I don't know if this is the one who's got like 80 million sons who all look exactly like him. It's basically him. I tried once to try to learn all the Saudi kings. It's impossible because they all look exactly the same, and they're all related as well. It's just kind of it's kind of.
Isn't one of his sons still on the throne now?
Oh, it's mental.
MBS.
No.
No, well, he's crown prince, isn't
he? They do this weird thing where the actual king is seldom seen, and it's almost like an Emperor Vader thing. MBS is the Vader, but there's an actual king there. He's some old dude, and it was a big deal when he actually didn't he visit someone? Was it I can't remember. He visited Putin himself, the king, which is rare because usually MBS does everything. So.
Roosevelt was dying, but over the last 13 years, he had used his power on an epic scale to transform the world. After the Wall Street crash and the terrible depression that followed, Roosevelt had taken charge. He had passed laws that broke up the banks, so they would never run out of control again. And he had rebuilt America with a series of...
Here we go, Murray Rothbard.
This is not really the point of the video, but I've just got to challenge it briefly. What banks did he break up? Can anyone name any in the chat? I don't know. Can anyone name any banks that were broken up under Roosevelt's presidency? I don't think there are any. It's complete nonsense. All leftists, it seems, like virtually all the leftists I've ever heard anything from in the whole world, they all have this set of just wrong canards, which is Theodore Roosevelt broke up the banks or the trusts. Franklin Roosevelt was good and did the same. Yeah, was against business, even though he was obviously in with them. And obviously McCarthy, Joseph McCarthy, was going after nothing. It's just all in his imagination. This is one of the three essential leftist canards about the first half of the 20th century, which allow them to think that, I don't know, whatever it is they want to think. Anyway, sorry, move on.
Giant dams that brought electrical power and employment to millions of people. And he had planned and fought a world war against Germany and Japan. Now, as Roosevelt sat waiting for Abdulaziz, no one could possibly have imagined the consequences of this meeting. For it was going to unleash forces that in the future would undermine everything that Roosevelt had worked for. His belief that politicians should use their power in a planned way to reshape the world.
But this failed. It was a fantasy.
Well, what did he say just then? Sorry, what did he say about planning a war against Germany and Japan? I missed the start of that sentence. What he said Roosevelt planned it.
Let's go back a little bit.
Just after.
He had passed laws that broke up the banks, so they would never run out of control again. And he had rebuilt America with a series of giant dams that brought electrical power and employment to millions of people. And he had planned and fought a world war against Germany and Japan.
Well. That is true. That is bloody hell.
Massive red pill by Curtis for plonk in this casual narrative.
Fair dinkum.
See, there you were. You were getting all excited with your Curtis hate facts, and then he delivers.
Does he realise what he said there?
Very probably.
Now,
Curtis is a Pearl Harbor truther. A kind of
stunning. Absolutely amazing.
As Roosevelt sat waiting for Abdulaziz, no one could possibly have imagined the consequences of this meeting. For it was going to unleash forces that in the future would undermine...
You've got to call them a trook. Trook. If you're a broccoli zoomer, that's a truth nuke. Trook. Slipped in.
Everything that Roosevelt had worked for. His belief that politicians should use their power in a planned way to reshape the world. But Roosevelt knew that to keep that power, America needed oil, and he wanted to forge an alliance with the king to make sure that the vast Saudi oil fields remained under American control. In their conversation, the two men laid the foundations for an alliance that continues to the present day. America would get its oil, and in return, Saudi Arabia would receive wealth and security from America.
Do you think George Lucas based Jabba the Hutt on the Saudis?
Or the Gungans, yeah. Oh, no, that's underwater.
He wouldn't use cheap racial caricatures in that way.
I think he may have,
I
think he would.
This,
that was Watto from The Phantom Menace, by the way. I'm just to emphasise what Curtis said here. I think is as true now, 10 years after this was made, as it was when he said it. Like the Saudi. This may be controversial, but the Saudi alliance with America is even stronger than the Israeli one, arguably. The Israeli one is under some pressure at the moment. I don't believe that Trump's going to ditch them or anything, but it is obviously very costly for America to be involved with Iran. It may allied with Israel. It costs them in their relations with most of the rest of the world all the time. And it involves them in appalling crimes, sickening crimes and hypocrisy. But with Saudi, yeah, it does, but it's less blatant. I mean, the Saudi government is pretty tyrannical. It's, what they've done to their own people, God knows. I mean, but it's never questioned. Nobody questions it. I mean, there may be I don't know, Thomas Massey may have one congressman or something, but nobody seems to attack it. Whereas obviously there is a huge movement. BDS is one thing, but, the whole of the left, well, most leftists and a large part of the right, the real right, including some of MAGA, by the way, are against the alliance with Israel. But whoever comments on the fact that America is still allied with, amid all the talk of liberal democracy and human rights.
Yeah, I mean, right? The Saudi Arabian government is so openly corrupt as well, and it has been for decades. This is just accepted as a part of life, weirdly.
Yeah. So if I may, I'll intrude with a bit on this, because this is the Quincy Agreement that was took place on 14th of February 1945 aboard the USS Quincy in the Great Bitter Lake, which is a kind of a turnaround area on the Suez Canal. And I'll actually read the memorandum of the conversation between Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the King of Saudi Arabia, and President Roosevelt. It's not actually that long, but it gives an insight into some interesting tensions about the trade-offs being made. So this is from US official records. Number one, the President asked His Majesty for his advice regarding the problem of Jewish refugees driven from their homes in Europe. His Majesty replied that, in his opinion, the Jews should return to live in the lands from which they were driven. The Jews whose homes were completely destroyed and who have no chance of livelihood in their homelands should be given living space in the Axis countries which oppressed them. The President remarked that Poland might be considered a case in point. The Germans appear to have killed 3 million Polish Jews, by which count there should be space in Poland for the resettlement of many homeless Jews. Just a reminder, this meeting is taking place, literally Roosevelt has come fresh from Yalta, where they've basically sold Poland and Eastern Europe off to Stalin. He continues in the record. His Majesty then expounded the case of the Arabs and their legitimate rights in their lands, and stated that the Arabs and the Jews could never cooperate, neither in Palestine nor in any other country. His Majesty called attention to the increasing threat to the existence of the Arabs and the crisis which has resulted from continued Jewish immigration and the purchase of land by the Jews. His Majesty further stated that the Arabs would choose to die rather than yield their lands to the Jews. His Majesty stated that the hope of the Arabs is based upon the word of honor of the Allies, and upon the well-known love of justice of the United States, and upon the expectation that the United States will support them. The President replied that he wished to assure His Majesty that he would do nothing to assist the Jews against the Arabs, and would make no move hostile to the Arab people. He reminded His Majesty that it is impossible to prevent speeches and resolutions in Congress or in the press which may be made on any subject. His reassurance concerned his own future policy as Chief Executive of the United States government. His Majesty thanked the President for his statement and mentioned the proposal to send an Arab mission to America and England to expound the case of the Arabs and Palestine. The President stated that he thought this was a very good idea, because he thought many people in America and England are misinformed. His Majesty said that such a mission to inform the people was useful, but more important to him was what the President had just told him concerning his own policy toward the Arab people. Part 2. His Majesty stated that the problem of Syria and Lebanon was of deep concern to him, and he asked the President what would be the attitude of the United States government in the event that France should continue to press intolerable demands upon Syria and the Lebanon. The President replied that the French government had given him in writing their guarantee of the independence of Syria and the Lebanon, and that he could at any time write to the French government to insist that they honour their word. In the event that the French should thwart the independence of Syria and the Lebanon, the United States government would give to Syria and the Lebanon all possible support short of the use of force. And the last part. Number 3, the President spoke of his great interest in farming, stating that he himself was a farmer. He emphasized the need for developing water resources to increase the land under cultivation, as well as to turn the wheels which do the country's work. He expressed special interest in irrigation, tree planting and water power, which he hoped would be developed after the war in many countries, including the Arab lands. Stating that he liked Arabs, he reminded His Majesty that to increase land under cultivation would decrease the desert and provide living for a larger population of Arabs. His Majesty thanked the President for promoting agriculture so vigorously, but said that he himself could not engage with any enthusiasm in the development of his country's agriculture and public works if this prosperity would be inherited by the Jews. And lastly, to round it off, Roosevelt wrote a letter a couple of months later in April to the King, which rounds this off. It says, "Great and good friend, I have received the communication which your Majesty sent me under date of March 10th, 1945, in which you refer to the question of Palestine and to the continuing interest of the Arabs in current developments affecting that country. I am gratified that your Majesty took this occasion to bring your views on this question to my attention, and I have given the most careful attention to the statements which you make in your letter. I am also mindful of the memorable conversation which we had not so long ago, and in the course of which I had an opportunity to obtain so vivid an impression of your Majesty's sentiments on this question. Your Majesty will recall that on previous occasions I communicated to you the attitude of the American government towards Palestine, and made clear our desire that no decision be taken with respect to the basic situation of that country without full consultation with both Arabs and Jews. Your Majesty will also doubtless recall that during our recent conversation I assured you that I would take no action in my capacity as Chief of the Executive Branch of this government which might prove hostile to the Arab people. It gives me pleasure to renew to your Majesty the assurances which you have previously received regarding the attitude of my government and my own as Chief Executive with regards to the question of Palestine, and to inform you that the policy of this government in this respect is unchanged. I desire also at this time to send you my best wishes for your Majesty's continued good health and for the welfare of your people. Your good friend, Franklin D. Roosevelt."
Wow.
Then he died right after that, right? He died like a few weeks after that, I think.
Not so long, yeah.
And then
very interesting stuff, that.
I would just point out here that, like, I mean, Roosevelt is not that hot on the Zionist idea, according to that. I take it, right? Obviously, the King of Saudi Arabia is dead against it. The British government wasn't that keen on it at the time. It was kind of, well, Churchill was, but there's a lot of forces ready to resist the Zionist idea, and yet under Truman, who also wasn't keen on it, it still happened. You know, Israel was created in 1948.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there's that period, I would say, between FDR there and JFK is kind of interesting because it's not the exact same setup as we see a little bit later on. It's a far cry from George Bush and the neocons. I'll just put it that way. And there's a lot more of this kind of back and forth resistance. Just to the point, by the way, I have pulled up a Wikipedia page. There's the king that Simon was just talking about here. All right. And then the successors are all his sons. And I mean, okay, this one looks a little...
Mr. Bean.
That's Faisal. He was the runt of the litter, clearly, right? I remember him as well. But look, they're all just like variations of the same man. They're all, I think, that's the current king.
Right.
That was his older brother. That was his older brother. That was his older brother. His older brother. His older brother. Their father. Right. So I mean, and he was the first king of the modern Saudi Arabia, the one that Simon was just quoting from. So they're still going. Like, he's still just one generation on from this same guy. So anyway,
one other like big complication as well with the Saudis is that, like, in Islam, you're not really supposed to have monarchs, are you? You're supposed to have one caliph, right? And you have like governors or whatever, but you're not really like. There's not supposed to be any monarch. A monarchy is not an Islamic idea, is it? And yet, Saudi is the home of the most fundamentalist, and obviously the Saudi regime helps spread as part of some sort of deal. Apparently, I think this might go on to be mentioned, but they help spread the most fundamentalist form of Islam, Sunni Islam, around the world, right? Wahhab,
certainly the hottest
Wahhabism.
wasabiism. Oh no!
Oh please!
Sorry.
Come on. Right, back to sensible, man. Wahhabism, yeah. For God's sake. Right, we can all do one cheap pun now, Sam. You've got a cheap pun card.
But the king was well aware of the dangers of opening up his country to the influence of the modern West. And in the negotiations that followed, he laid down a condition. "We will take your technology and your money," he said, "but you must leave our faith alone." The Saudi faith was called Wahhabism. It was a radical, violent, and extremely puritanical form of Islam. And its followers among the Bedouin tribes hated the modern world.
Pause.
Wahhab
Just we're going to quickly say there was a greater echo in that footage there of the famous shot in Lawrence of Arabia, you know, where Omar Sharif comes across the desert, the heat haze shot. I think Curtis must have been thinking, "Oh, brilliant visual references for free."
Yeah, and guys actually riding on camels as well.
Wahhabism was part of a wider movement in Islam that had risen up in reaction to the European empires. Another was the Deobandi movement in India. They all believed that modern imperialism was corrupting the true nature of Islam and wanted to go back to a world based on the original teachings of the Islamic texts. Abdulaziz had harnessed this force in the 1920s to seize power. But he had unleashed something that didn't want to stop. The Wahhabists wanted to go on and create a caliphate across the whole of the Arab world.
Isn't that ironic that they want to revolt against the modern world, but end up basically fueling, like literally fueling the modern world with their oil?
Yeah.
And becoming like the richest people in the world? It's kind of ironic.
It does kind of raise the question of why they considered this a good deal, you know? The deal that goes on to be made.
And to stop them, in 1929, Abdulaziz machine-gunned them. He ruthlessly killed the warriors who had made him king. But their belief, a violent, intolerant, and above all backward-looking version of Islam, remained at the heart of Saudi Arabian society. And the deal made that day on the Great Bitter Lake meant that America would get its oil, but it would also be protecting Wahhabism, a force that had its own global ambitions. Ambitions that were very different from America's.
He's not one of the kings, right?
No, that's Ahmed Shah Massoud. He's well, Curtis will explain.
Too good looking to be one of the kings.
The interesting shot, this one. I'll stop it when we let it run for a bit, but it's an interesting comment on this. Yeah, interesting. This music there is from a 1877 ballet called The Kingdom of the Shades. This piece from a ballet called La Bayadère by Ludwig Minkus. But the interesting thing I find here with the visual reference on this shot is anybody familiar with the Joy Division video for a song called Atmosphere that they do?
I'm not, I'm afraid. No.
It's the one with all the sort of black and white robed monks kind of walking in this desert space, and they're looking to sort of plant these icons and monuments, and it's a kind of it's the only Joy Division song that has a kind of optimistic feel to it. It's got this sort of, it's torn between a kind of mourning and a sort of celebration sound, and they did a video of it famously in 1988. Where you've got it's like I mean I think it's only coincidental. I don't think the Afghans were necessarily secret Joy Division fans, but it almost mirrors the shot in that video of these monks dragging along this massive portrait of Ian Curtis, who had killed himself 8 years before. I think Curtis must have seen this and loved it, because I mean, again, Joy Division is one of those kind of references in that sort of cultural theory about ghosts and hauntology that Curtis is literally working from. So if you want, go and look at that video for the song Atmosphere by Joy Division, and you'll see exactly what I mean.
I do think, Simon, that his style is a lot more lyrical than his previous works.
Yes.
There's a massive uptick in it's much more poetic and dreamlike, as you were saying, compared to something like The Trap or Living Dead or any of them, really.
Yeah, a lot less choppy, a lot more dreamlike, as you say. And actually, if I'm frankly, a lot of it's very beautiful. It's very beautifully done.
Lads, I mean, I guess you're seeing the problem with this picture, right? There's not enough bumming going on, not enough not enough pride flags, not enough BLM worship. All this needs to change. All this needs to change.
I think we do see some of that coming in later.
Yeah.
Not actually, sorry, I don't mean not graphically, but
a bit of subversion comes in, yeah.
Disgusting, these mountain people not embracing liberal values. Look, there could be a McDonald's right there.
I mean, literally one of the pieces he uses, one of the burial pieces, is called "In McDonald's," which underscores some of this stuff we'll see a bit later on.
By the mid-1950s, the American engineers had built the giant dams that were going to create what they called a new wonderland of vegetation and power in Helmand. But the project was running into problems, and it was beginning to lose its innocence. As the giant dams were completed, they had an unexpected effect. They raised the level of the water table.
I think this is a Bowie track. Is that not a Bowie track?
Very likely. I don't know which one it might be.
I feel like it's from Low.
It could be Wasawa.
I think it's Wasawa from Low.
Yeah.
Unusual for him to pick a Bowie track. That'll be the Brian Eno connection, though, because Eno was on that record. So
it's Wasawa, the very long one on side 2, isn't it, or something? It's,
yes,
that's probably yeah.
Like all the best Bowie fans, of course. I love side 2 of Low.
And started to bring salt to the surface. And one of the plants that thrived in this new soil were poppies. Some of those leading the project said they should stop. But the American government stepped in and insisted that they should continue. Because by now, the dams had become a central part of the struggle with the Soviet Union. All sides in the Cold War began to compete to offer Afghanistan bigger and better schemes to modernize the country. Afghan politicians exploited this ruthlessly. The Prime Minister, Mohammed Daoud, spent his time traveling the world, playing the countries, Russia, America and China, off against each other. Daoud wanted to use the modernization as a way of consolidating his power. Afghanistan was a fragmented country. Power was divided between ethnic groups and tribes.
By the way, the more I find out about LBJ, the more and more I'm convinced that he's the worst president ever. I should have a video coming out in a couple of weeks exposing previously unknown parts of LBJ's villainy, which will be new to a lot of people. So,
am I expecting a Steven Spielberg movie to be made about him then very soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Spielberg makes an LBJ epic.
Champion of civil rights, etc.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to question. I just wanted to question what he said a second ago about the poppies. I mean, should we really blame American insistence on the dam project for creating the poppy, the heroin problem from Afghanistan? That didn't exist before? Should I take that? I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but
I know the Taliban shut it down pretty quickly, though, didn't they, when they took over?
So
I'm told.
Remember, the production couldn't be stopped under the American occupation.
And he saw how the dam project in Helmand could be used to consolidate the Pashtun grip on the whole country. He persuaded the Americans to make the project even bigger, to turn it into a giant piece of social engineering. Thousands of Pashtun nomads who spent their time roaming the border area with Pakistan would be settled in the new farmland created by the dams. Daoud presented it as just another...
Sorry to say this, right, but those images there of them, of just like rubble and kind of dirt land, and did these people just kind of like hang out? Like, do those kids just like sit there? Like, go back and have a look at that.
Pashtun
What they just live there with no houses and just chill out in that arid mountain? Do they? That's what it feels like. But I'm just it's a genuine question. Like, what are they doing? Just hanging out in the middle of nowhere? Yeah.
Don't know much about the Pashtun nomadic lifestyle, but I imagine there'd be a lot of their backyard would look like that.
I mean, I mentioned that my dad was from these Bakhtiari people, right? I mean, they say nomads. What they did is that they'd have two towns that they'd live in, and then they'd migrate from one to the other. So there'd be a like a set path that followed the seasons. Okay, so it was almost like a kind of because they still do it. My dad wanted to go to it once. He wanted to like join them and like do the trail type thing. But it's not like they didn't have homes. Like they did. They had like two bases on either side, and they'd go between them back and forth all year because They were pastoral, so the animals they had, needed different climates at different times of the year. So that's why they went nomadic. They didn't just wander around for fun. But like these people are just like hanging out on an arid mountain for no reason. So I mean, I just love to know like what's going on here.
To turn it into a giant piece of social engineering. Thousands of Pashtun nomads who spent their time roaming the border area with Pakistan would be settled in the new farmland created by the dams. Dowd presented it as just another innocent piece of modernization, and the Americans happily agreed. What they didn't realize was that they were unwittingly being sucked into Afghan power politics. Not only was Dowd increasing Pashtun power, but he was sowing the seeds of bitter rivalries over the division and ownership of land in Helmand.
Sowing the seeds.
Is Aphex Twin?
No, this is that burial track called In McDonald's.
Hard trance.
It's this is actually, they're listening to Russian dance music by a guy called Ruki Vavler.
Pause this, please. If I'm one of these geezers having my nails done, although I'm having my nails done, I probably would just say, like, sorry, just with the music, this is all a bit too gay. Can you just change the music, please? It's making me look bad.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder if those girls are somehow leftovers of the Russian occupation, like camp followers who, have stayed on to do the kind of nail bar stuff, which is why they're playing the Russian dance music.
What do you think of these moves, Horace?
Yeah, same applies.
I had to. Sorry, I was going to say I had to look into this a bit because I was interested in the look of this guy. I didn't quite sort of register him as Afghan. He's got this sort of Asiatic phenotype. He is a Hazara. They're about somewhere between 3 and 20% of the population of Afghanistan. And quite interesting indeed. The Hazaras, it says, go to my wiki, they have a mix of West Eurasian and East Eurasian components. Genetic data shows Hazaras in Afghanistan clustered closely with the Uzbek population, while both groups are notably distinct from Afghanistan's Tajik and Pashtun populations. There is evidence of both paternal and maternal connections in the Hazaras to Turkic, Mongolic, and Iranic populations. Analyses suggest that the Hazaras are more closely related to the Turkic populations of Central Asia than to Mongolians, East Asians, or Indo-Iranians.
You can see some sort of East Asian there, though, can't you?
Well, one thing I will say about this part of the world, Iran included, they bloody love to have a dance. They are always getting up and dancing. Oh, it's so bloody tiresome. I mean, it's even worse than here. People in the West like dancing, but they even love it even more. Always having a little jig there. As you can imagine, that goes great with my temperament. So.
This is why you're not getting back to your roots anytime soon.
Anyway, let's carry on.
Pause, please. Sorry, it's not really relevant, but I was at a wedding once when I was about 14, 15, no, about 16, 17, a wedding that I had to go to because, you do when you're a kid. And, like everyone was dancing, and one of the sort of family friends just, I'm just sitting there. I'm fine as I am, not dancing, but whatever. Like, I'm not pissed off that other people are. And one of the family friends come up and like sort of just tried to pull me up, like big grin on her face. She's having a good time, And I'm just like, I just didn't move really. I didn't get up. I didn't like shove her or anything. And I was just like, she insisted. So I was like, "No, leave me alone, leave me alone." And she went off and started crying. And I got told off for her being upset, for her trying to force me to dance, and me not wanting to. Like, where's the justice in that? You know what I mean? Anyway,
Well, this is the plight of being a bloke.
Yeah, just a normal bloke. I'm not being grumpy. It's like, I'm not being grumpy. You're just trying to get me to be too chirpy. Like, just leave me alone.
You made a girl cry.
I tell you what,
middle-aged. Like.
This is going to be hypocritical as someone who's divorced and married twice, right? And made all my friends go to 2 weddings. I hope none of them get divorced and get remarried. I think all of my friends are married now, which means I've got a big old gap. Now I hope that there's no more weddings for like the next 20 years. Because I'll be devastated. I always get devastated when I have to go to a wedding. It's just kind of, I've been to so many of them at this point as well. Anyway, let's carry on. Although I will say that at my second one, I did manage to set up camp and have a few cigars there. People would come and see me, almost like visiting the king or something. I was like, I could get used to this, you know. So it wasn't that bad. But anyway, let's carry on. Oh shit! Someone's saying you're not married, so you're going to get married, and I'm going to be dragged along to the wedding. I know already. Going to be the wedding of Simon and Victoria Willing in the tram.
Oh, no, I don't think I'll be getting married. It is too late for me, son.
Oh, never too late, Sonny. What were those guys? What Al Pacino who we saw last week?
Yeah, yes.
Slapped it at the age of 80 odd.
80-year-old Rosario. Yeah.
Simon, were you paraphrasing Darth Vader there?
Just a bit, yeah.
Okay. That wasn't about marriage, you know. It was about saving his soul from the dark side.
Yeah, exactly.
Did he get married in secret to Padme?
There's just no romance, really. Oh well, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Pause. And then he ends up on his knees, going, "No!"
Well, that's what happens.
or in the Chinese subtitles, it was "Do not want." If anyone remembers that,
Would have been interesting if they dealt with divorce in the Star Wars universe, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, it was all the rage in the Republic, and then of course Palpatine made it a lot more difficult to get divorced.
Quite.
Horace, you're now getting a lot of grief to that you should have danced when you were a kid. So to add insult to injury, you're now getting it again from the audience who are telling you off for making that girl cry.
She was a middle-aged woman, by the way. Has nobody ever just felt slightly out of the mood of where they are? Like, it's just that, you know, like everyone's being more chirpy than me. I'm not having a go at her. I'm glad they're having a good time.
My whole life.
Just glossing past that scene of horrendous violence there. That was the attempted assassination of Hamid Karzai in September 2002. He was actually just leaving a wedding, as it happens, and basically there was a car, but that car there, the black one, was American Special Forces guys who were trying to shunt the vehicle out of the way because his driver made the mistake of stopping and letting people sort of look through the window and have a chat, and there was a guy. Those guys who were slumped on the other side of the road, one of them was in an Afghan new army uniform, and he took some shots into the car, just narrowly missing Karzai. But unfortunately, the two lads who were by the side of the car, just the Americans, shot the assailant, and of course the bullets went straight through him and into them, so they're all dead.
It's a very small convoy, isn't it? Like for the president.
Yeah, and this is why you see even the Prime Minister's convoy in Whitehall. You don't slouch around in convoys. You keep moving fast.
It wasn't always like that. Like History Bro, Bo from the Lotus Eaters, he was working somewhere once, and Tony Blair came for a visit to the place, and he said he stood where Tony Blair was going to come through, and he walked right past him, and there were guys in front and behind, but he could have just done something. It wasn't good. I'm not suggesting, but it was like, whoa, there's cracks. There's cracks in the armor.
Yeah.
Well, I think you'll find that Tony Blair was so loved that nobody would have tried to take him out.
Or he's actually hard himself, maybe secretly a hard man.
Yeah, could be like King Zog with packing his own heat.
Just use the force to stop the bullets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but looking at these scenes, I was about to say it's like Afghanistan has not been finished, but it's like it was never started. It's like the country was never actually started, isn't it? It's kind of, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like it was started, it was bombed, and then it was started again, then it was bombed again.
Like open guttering is always like that is always a sign of undevelopedness, isn't it?
Of course, Edgware Road's a bit like that now if you go there.
Oh.
I'm only messing around. We're gonna have to I reckon half an hour, Simon.
Yeah.
Looking at the time.
Yeah. That's what my motorbike looked like the other day when I fell off it.
Now, you may think that he's upset about the scenes that we've just witnessed, but actually he's thinking, why am I here? Why have I not started a small barbershop in a Shropshire village? I mean, there were they found 14 barbershops in one tiny town the other day. Yeah, that was in the newspaper the other week.
In the Welsh Valleys or something. It was somewhere in rural
in
Wales.
In the middle of rural Wales, 14 barbershops. And because because my dad's Iranian, I always get into a bit of a chat with them to try to figure out where they're from. So I always ask. They're almost always either Kurds, or they're from Afghanistan, or they're Iraqi. They're never Turks. That I have not once met a genuine Turkish barber. They're all from Syria is another place. Syrian Kurds, Iraqi Kurds, or Afghans.
We got quite a few Turkish restaurants around here as well. Are they not Turkish either?
Well, I just asked them. So, do you mind me asking? Are you actually are you Turkish then? And they'll probably tell you that. And this is what makes me think that it's a government scheme, because they are all places that have had recent conflict involving the British Army, which makes me think, like, well, Like, how on earth does this dude get the idea of moving to a rural village in Wales and opening a barbershop? I mean, it's just like, how does that happen?
Told to. They're actually told to. I'm sure loads of them are just told, like, you just move to Britain. Like, simple as that. Just some stupid lefties in the administration. Just,
Wonder if this is a good place to call it. It's the start of a new little chapter.
sure.
Various. So there's been a few super chats. This is an interesting one, and we're going to probably spend at least 3 episodes here, if not 4. Break it up into little chunks. Why not milk those views? Eh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
First super chat was sent by Fort Film Co-op, who says,
"Oh God, it's another one, is it? Go on."
Interesting piece of trivia. In Japan, this film was released as Bitter Rake.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Lewis
These are the jokes, folks.
Lewis, well, it's got to be better than wasabi. Lewis Shaw Morfitt says, Mr. Roberts said that the West has failed to remake itself. That is because it is not being allowed to actually and truthfully remake itself, but is being forced through a hole that it cannot fit into. Yep, I would agree with that. Chris Primer says, glad to see the Taliban getting to the real problem by banning chess. Yeah, that's a little bit needless. I mean, you can't really say chess is subversive, can you? Helps with your logic. That's another thing. There's a lot of chess playing in Iran, and they're all really good as well. I lost every single match I had there, which I'm still kind of bitter about. Coney says, Bitter Lake was the first Adam Curtis documentary I watched. I watched it late at night at the age of 16. An excellent piece of documentary filmmaking. Yeah, I certainly think the artistry is taking a step up in this one. It may be the most quote-unquote artistic of his works so far.
Yeah.
He also says, one of the questions this documentary makes me ask is why didn't the British just renegotiate the Knox-Darcy agreement with the Iranians and agree to a similar deal that the Americans made with the Saudis? It would have saved them so much trouble. Well, I mean, the problem is that the Knox-Darcy agreement was signed by a previous regime, and Mossadegh said, like, that deal is null and you can't get monopoly rights on oil signed with this old kingdom that we basically overthrew, right? So we want to nationalize the oil. That brought the Americans in, and then you couldn't re-sign the Knox-Darcy agreement because the Seven Sisters were involved. That's basically what happened. So the Americans used the situation to nudge the British out and get this, reinforce the power of the Shah. And that lasted for 20 years, and then they had the revolution. So Daniel Robinson said, although I've mentioned before that fella Darcy, when my dad first came to this country, he said he went to this place where he was studying engineering, and there was a massive statue of him there with a plaque on it with the name of his hometown, because my dad grew up in the town where the first oil drill was established. So there we go. Daniel Robinson says, the critical piece in operating a fiat empire is to control global drug prices, all high margin industries. If not, organized crime will then can eventually overtake nations. For example, the Mustache Man. Afghan plus Vietnam wars should be understood in these terms.
Why the fiat empire? Why mention the? Perhaps true to say that, but why the mention of fiat?
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned Watto earlier on, Laura, right? Watto, regardless of what you make of him, was a hard currency totalitarian. He was a hard currency libertarian, I should say.
Okay,
Like
are you
like
referring
Murray
to the
Rothbard
bit because he says credits will do fine?
No, they won't. Exactly. He won't take credit money. And if you watch my original defense of Palpatine, there's a whole section on Palpatine's use of hard currency as against the fiat currency of the Republic. And that little scene with Watto shows that the Republic had fallen to fiat currency. Palpatine brought back the gold standard. So, anyway,
but Palpatine's the baddie, so Lucas is pro fiat money.
Well, this is the thing. Lucas, despite himself, is pro Palpatine. He just doesn't quite understand it. You should. Yeah, I have a Princess Leia video coming out next week, and I may, when that comes out, put all of my Star Wars videos in one long supercut, so you can get all of my pro Palpatine arguments in one epic video. So there we are. Broman Hank says, "Good stream, lads. 10 minutes of Curtis, not bad."
It's only going to get worse this as we go on.
Is it Palpatine at one point says, "I love democracy"? Isn't that
Yes,
right
yeah,
Return of the
indeed.
Sith?
Yeah, and Jay says a few shekels for Simon's impending addiction.
Honestly, Simon, do be careful of that stuff. It's too
I'll
nice.
wean myself off it. No, it's not really touching the pain anymore, unfortunately. So I'll have to move on to
harder stuff,
medical grade heroin or something.
Oh my god, this is getting dark.
Chris says this is my top film of the 2010s. Pete Curtis. I'd put Curtis in the top British directors list. Curtis appears on a BFI list, etc., and not number one. And not one book has been written about him. Why do you think he's overlooked in those parts? I think that's because of an anti-TV bias. They're very big on films getting a cinematic release in BFI world, aren't they? So that's why you haven't, because the departments, the academics who write those books are in cinema studies departments and film studies departments. So you don't really get as many, would you agree with that, Simon?
Could you repeat that bit again? I was a bit out of it there.
He was like,
sorry, not on drugs or anything, but just looking at a message I've been sent. Sorry, say again.
You're saying like
a message from your dealer, yeah.
Oh dear.
This guy's saying that Curtis is one of his top British filmmakers of the past 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Why isn't, and even though he appears on BFI list, not a single book has been written on him. Why is that?
It's Curtis in cinema. He does seem sort of slightly indifferent to cinema. Actually, I read an interview where he's kind of a bit nonplussed. He doesn't. You see, he fights against being, described as an artist or a director of cinema. He will always revert it back to saying he's a journalist who makes documentaries. I mean, it's quite disappointing. I found out that as far as films he actually likes goes, one of his favorite films is Anchorman. The Will Ferrell film.
Right.
Other than that, he just relishes the actual archive he gets his hands on, and you can see sometimes, like we saw today, there'll be echoes of well-known films, Lawrence of Arabia or something else. Like I say, that Joy Division video or something. He's got an eye for pulling stuff together, but he doesn't. I agree. I mean, they have showed his films in America in cinemas where they didn't get releases because the BBC didn't, extend to getting them onto PBS or whatever, and people accessed it through the internet. But they did a cut of The Power of Nightmares as a film, and they may have done that with these other films. And to be honest, I mean, they kind of deserve it. Good big screen and the sound system. They are kind of. It's disappointing we have to kind of keep stopping the film and talking about it, because actually they are nice things to watch with people just as experiential drifts of cinematic artistry. But he wouldn't himself like the idea of being regarded as a sort of cinema auteur in any way.
I wouldn't object. I mean, I'm a little surprised that there's no books been written about Curto, but I wouldn't mind if or about Curtis, sorry, but I wouldn't mind if somebody did like a book about us, about our reviews of Curtis. That would be great. Just call it Curto or something, just like, maybe like with the author name, like one of those false names like Wu Ming, or
to be honest, I average about 20 pages of notes when I do these streams, and we've done however many so far. So there probably is a book's worth of analysis in there that you could do. I mean, I've seen academic analysis done of people like Chris Morris and so on, because there's quite a lot in there that you can find and pull apart. And Adam Curtis probably would warrant it. He'd probably be embarrassed by the attention, I suspect, though.
I mean, who would be in that list of the greatest British directors, of the past 20, 30 years? I mean, Shea Meadows, obviously, would probably be number one. If Chris Nolan. I mean, I don't really think of Christopher Nolan as a British director, but he is.
No, transatlantic now, isn't he? I mean, I quite like Ben Wheatley's stuff that I've seen recently, but I don't know how cinematic he is. He's. You don't get that kind of David Lean kind of epic cinema scale anymore. You don't get that kind of spectacle.
Who was that Welsh guy who did the martial arts movies?
The Raid, that one, one in Indonesia. That was
fucking cool. That movie, really cool.
Yeah,
but no, I think Shea Meadows would be number one on that list if I had to. Danny Boyle, is he still around? Has he done anything since the Olympics opening ceremony?
Exactly. I never really liked Danny Boyle. I mean, apart from Shallow Grave. I can't.
Guy Ritchie's still making films, isn't he? He's got a new one out.
Yeah.
Oh, there's that Nick Love. He did some famous films, didn't he? Was it Nick Love? Something like that.
It's probably because we don't have an art house scene anymore. So I guess you don't get the kind of auteur cinema directors that you used to back, at least, as late as the kind of late 80s, early 90s, where you had, the sort of Peter Greenaways of the world, people like that who were. But again, making films that are not necessarily completely legible for most people. They're kind of slightly academic, or I like a lot of. Yeah.
Sorry, who's the guy who did Jubilee? Derek something.
Derek Jarman, yeah. I mean, I quite like some of his stuff. It's quite interesting, and you can analyze them in a very interesting way. But for most people, they're kind of no particular interest at all. But I mean, I kind of like that sort of artsy fartsy stuff.
I watched because when I was about 12 or 13, adolescent, when Jubilee was going to be on TV, it was when Radio Times used to say contains everything, swearing, sex, nudity, shooting, whatever. I was like, yes, gotta watch that. And I was like, what am I watching? I didn't mind it. It was reasonably interesting. But I was like, what am I watching?
That kind of formalism has kind of died. Really, you don't see that anymore. And I think British directors, do kind of either go for action genre if they can on a budget, or stylized stuff like Ben Wheatley does. And I'm sure there's lots of interesting people out there, but I mean, I think cinema's just disregarded as a form now. You can't go to a cinema and see. I mean, people say this all the time. The sorts of films you saw in the 70s, you can't see The Godfather kind of stuff. Those kinds of epic scale films.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Shea Meadows to see what he's like, what happened to him, and of course, he all his stuff is TV now. Like he made. A series of This Is England and then Gallows Pole, and I haven't watched any of these. So he stopped making films. He's doing movies. He's doing TV, and I think a lot of talent is being drawn into that kind of idea of releasing the streaming Netflix thing, or I mean, I'm guessing This Is England came out on Channel 4. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of strange because in another sense, British cinema is actually going through a bit of a renaissance due to that deal that they signed in Pinewood Studios, but it's all Hollywood slop.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's actual. I mean, I have a sort of dream, if at all possible, one day that you could get people going back to the cinema. But what I'd really like is to have a cinema where you have like the old style rep cinema, where you could show old films. I don't mean necessarily desperately old, but I mean the classic films that you might want to watch, but on the big screen. You know, that if you weren't there in 1972 to see The Godfather on the big screen, you might like to see it on the big screen.
Yeah, like that one in
great.
what's it, the Prince Charles? I don't know if it's still there,
Which
but
I think it's being bought up and redeveloped. So I
oh
mean,
no,
and
that
again,
was
it's
like the
in
only
London.
good thing in London.
It's again in London, yeah, but yeah,
Prince Charles Flats, that is now.
yeah.
Oh
And
no.
but yeah, there's
King
lots
Charles
of
Flats.
great films over the last 50 years, let's say, that would be just and just a bit longer. It would be great to see on the big screen, which you never have the opportunity to do, because it is, as I find, watching stuff in the cinema is a brilliant experience. But I don't want to watch the slop. I want to see some films as they should be seen.
Interesting. I went to see Scarface in the cinema on some sort of re-release thing, and it was cool, to be honest.
Yeah.
I also did do you remember when they released, like, they did this thing where they played all of Lord of the Rings or something on one day, and I was there all night. And I think they did the Star Wars. I did that once as well. I went on my own as well to watch. It was cool, to be honest.
Did you go to see the special editions of Star Wars when they came out in '97 with all the augmented CGI?
No. I only had the VHSs then, but I'm talking like I see about 10 years ago. Maybe I did that.
I did go to those. So I mean, that was my first opportunity ever to see Star Wars in the cinema.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the newer versions of the old ones. Yeah, it was still good. They didn't spoil it. It was good.
I saw Star Wars in 1977 in the Hartlepool Odeon, and I remember one of the things I remember about it. I think we went in a big school group to see it. Actually, it was great. And one of the things I remember was in the foyer, some kids on Blue Peter had like built a spaceship. It was like classic out of detergent bottles and sticky back plastic, and it was this massive kind of slab of imaginative spaceship these Blue Peter people had made and everybody just walked past it. They just weren't interested.
The two of the best things I've done along these sorts of lines. I remember I went with the missus once to BFI. This was back before AAA was born, obviously. Don't get to do anything now. And we went to see 2001 Space Odyssey with a live orchestra. That was fucking brilliant. That was incredible. Yeah. And the other thing is I saw, that film Haxan, the kind of old Swedish, it's kind of like, it's got like witchcraft. It's brilliant. It's like a film from the 20s. Classic film. I went to see that where they had live music, and it was in like an old abandoned church. That was fucking brilliant as well. I like those sorts of things too. And another time, me and the missus saw the Wolf on Wall Street, or the Wolf of Wall Street, and it was broadcast onto the side of Battersea Power Station.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you got these little. We were in these little booths, right? So you didn't have to sit next to anyone. You got like cushions and things, and you got to see a film broadcast on the site. That was brilliant as well.
Yeah.
These were all in the halcyon pre-COVID days. I don't know if these things still exist now.
They used to do screenings of Withnell and I up at the actual Uncle Monty's cottage in Sledale Hall, up in Cumbria. They would.
Should we quote the whole of Withnell and I right now?
I demand some booze.
There we go. You've started.
There we go. All right. Let's. We should probably. I tell you what. My main memory of seeing that Wolf on Wall Street next to in Battersea is that they were selling this lobster mac and cheese. One of the best things I've ever eaten. It was just like on a street stand in the like kind of. It was kind of, I don't know. London was kind of trendy like 10 years ago.
Lobster mac and cheese.
Lobster mac and cheese in Battersea Power Station. Those were the days.
That's hot stuff.
I don't get to do any of that now. They sell that in a lot of. You can get that in a lot of good places. Johnny Punchclock says Simon's reading voice is like audible honey.
Thank you very much.
Simon, when you read out the bit from Roosevelt and the Saudi king, I thought that was excellent.
Thank you very much. I was considering doing American accent for it, but I don't want to outweigh the audience's patience.
Eyes That Watch said, "Wow, the gay had their own Belt and Road initiative." Crispy GT has just sent $2.56 of Australian money, so that'll buy me a single lint bar. Thank you very much for that. Chris Primer says, "All right," and I think that's all of them. I don't know why it does that. Port Film Co-op says, "Simon, Hauntology Accent Challenge." British potato crisp commercial from the 1980s that doesn't exist.
Oh, he always does this to me, these impossible things. Well, I wasn't here in the 1980s, actually, so I couldn't do it. I was in Australia. And out there, crisps are called chips. And I don't remember any adverts for them at all. Yeah. Sorry.
James Murr says, "Hi, AA. Your sensible centrism is reaching confused old left Marxists such as myself." Oh, you're my people, James. You're helping to unify opposition against American liberal universalism and its crisis of civilization. Fantastic. That's music to my ears. That's exactly the conversation that needs to be happening, as I said.
Now since Bastani is drawn in to encounter at the lodge.
When I
sorry, someone in the chat, Retronus, says you missed his super chat.
I did not. I am looking at through.
Sorry.
Oh, I did actually. Good evening, Simon Roberts, Horace, and Mr. AA.
Good evening.
I hope your afternoon has been well. I ate a real good burger for dinner. I love good pickles in a burger.
Agree.
So there we go.
Yeah.
Pickles.
Yeah.
You get that in a number of places too. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. This is I'm kind of excited to get through the rest of Bitter Lake. It's really interesting stuff. And I don't know, the archival bit is something you get his love for the archive. But I kind of love watching archival stuff myself, you know.
Yeah.
Just luxuriate in the environs.
Yeah. Yeah, there might not be so much to say. I'm increasingly conscious as we go on with this stuff, because this is all stuff that hadn't been seen up to 2015. It was just lying in the cupboard in Kabul. So, you know, it's difficult to find background context on it unless it's a historic event like, you know, the assassination attempts there. But I just think there's a fantastic beauty and a sort of sensibility to it, which, you know, we're going to slightly ruin, obviously, talking over it, but it's great stuff.
I don't think we're ruining it. I think we're complimenting it.
To the former Marxist guy or the current Marxist guy in the chat, one of the things that I think people need to realize is that, you know, people casually throw out things like, well, divide and conquer, it's a strategy and so on. But it is genuinely one of the hardest things to get any sort of meaningful discussion, because so much, whether it's on the right or the left, depends on guilt by association and, oh, because it's this person saying it and we're not meant to like this person, therefore don't listen to them, right? And this tactic is used continually across a whole range of issues. And I mentioned Dave Smith. That's something that he was talking about as well, how that kind of pointless partisanship then gets in the way of actually discussing anything, because you're focusing on who said it, not what they've said. And they use that strategy. In fact, I had a chat with Carl when I was in Swindon last week. I don't know if it's aired yet, where I talk about, like, if we're going to find any solutions, like, for example, us on this chat here, we want to see a massive reduction in immigration, and we want to see possibly remigration as well. Okay. And, you know, I'm sure most people watching this, most people in the country want that. Okay. Now, one of the problems that we have, though, is that there's a dichotomy where it's like, well, if it's Starmer doing it, therefore we have to find a problem with it. It's like, well, actually, no. If I don't care how we get there, right? And this is one of the things that I would love to see people move beyond the kind of petty left, right. Oh, we can't listen to that because Ashkar said it, or we can't listen to this because this dude says it. You know, guess what? You can actually agree and disagree on a point-by-point basis with certain people. It's possible that people that you hate occasionally make good points. Like, I made a video called "I Hate Rory Stewart," and then proceeded to watch him for about a month, and actually was like, actually, Rory Stewart occasionally makes some really good points. So it's like there's a kind of spirit of intellectual charity that has been lost through
and maturity as well.
Polarization, exactly, Simon.
It's just an acceptance as you get older. It's not to say, we're not some kind of floating wimpy centrists or anything like that on this channel. I mean, I think we've got some fairly clear, sharp and harsh views on certain things. But at the same time, like you say, you can't just, I hate that guy, but he is saying something I agree with. I mean, that's just increasingly the case, that you can't pin it down now to all being in one club that you all follow and, my guy, right or wrong. It just doesn't work. There are some people who are going to make tangible differences to your life in terms of what they might do. And you think, well, what do I think about?
One of the areas of genuine commonality between what I would call the authentic right and the authentic left is that both have been contained, marginalized, sidelined, and subverted by the neoliberal center, who continually co-opt things. And in fact, I keep on mentioning this Dave Smith chat. I might as well mention what it was. It was called, right, it was on a channel called Breaking Points.
Yeah, with
and
Crystal
it was called,
Ball.
Right, the video is called, Crystal, and the video was called Dave Smith Flames Ben Shapiro for Israel Wokeness is the name of that video. Right, obviously slop title, but Dave Smith, who's a libertarian, right, who quotes Tom Woods and people like that. I'm no longer a libertarian. Horace is. Simon is not.
Handmaidens to socialism.
Yeah, right. But he makes a lot of good points on that stream about how the authentic left, when they started talking about Occupy Wall Street, how the fake neoliberal left, like Hillary Clinton and the Obamas of this world and so on, shifted the rhetoric onto race because that's a weak point for the left, and it used that basically to put away the Bernie bros and he brought up all sorts of things I've forgotten, like how Bernie was hectored by BLM activists who kind of hijacked his rallies, and how they basically like did in Bernie to astroturf Hillary into the 2016 election. And of course all of those tactics have been used by the likes of the Tories, by the likes of the Republican Party, by the likes of Ben Shapiro, on the quote-unquote right as well. So there you get this kind of, it's like controlled opposition on both sides. And there are certain things happening at the moment, I think, that are making both sides, whether you're quote-unquote right or left, start to realize, hold on a second, this entire system is fake. This set of fake dichotomies, quote-unquote culture war issues and whatever else, are fake. It's the what does Scrump and Evelyn call it? The endless conversation. You're encouraged to have an endless conversation in a kind of small allowable box, and anything outside of that is to be pilloried. And I actually think it's wonderful that somebody like Dave Smith is, making these points to huge audiences now, because they're things that we've been saying for years. So anyway, all right, guys. Well, I will catch all of you live next Tuesday. I'm off to Swindon again tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be. I think I'm due to go on the show. Maybe I don't know. We'll see. I'll turn up and they'll stick me in somewhere. Probably. I'll be talking about Trivium as well, of course. And I'll see all of you soon. Horace, where can people find you, sir?
Yeah, just at my Substack under the video. Thanks everyone.
Simon?
At Simon__Roberts on Twitter, and I'll be posting up a few bits from the Curtis blog of old to go along with Bitter Lake. And
I mentioned Trivium. You can pick that up now from the academic agency. The courses are available, and most importantly of all, friends, get out.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Well, that's easily fixed.